Rejection is one of the most deeply human experiences, and yet one of the most painful. It touches nearly everyone at some point, whether in friendships, romantic interests, career pursuits, or social acceptance. But in the case of emotional or romantic vulnerability, when someone expresses their feelings, lays bare their affection, and reaches out hoping to be accepted, the pain of rejection can run far deeper than we often recognize. It's not simply a no, it's the dismissal of hope, the shattering of a personal vision, and in some cases the weakening of self-worth. In educational psychology and emotional development, rejection is often linked to what's called social pain. This is not just a metaphor. Studies using brain imaging have shown that the same areas of the brain that light up during physical pain also activate during emotional rejection. In other words, rejection hurts not just emotionally, but neurologically. The brain interprets social rejection in ways that mirror physical injury, and when we understand this, we start to appreciate just how intense the emotional response to rejection can be, especially when it involves matters of the heart. Now, let's put ourselves in the shoes of someone who has just been rejected after confessing their feelings. This isn't just a casual conversation for them. It took courage to speak up. They were not simply stating a preference, they were opening a window to their emotional world. They were saying, "I see something in you, I value you, I want to build a connection with you." That level of openness is extremely vulnerable. It's not a transaction, it's a moment of intense emotional risk. When that vulnerability is met with rejection, the person experiences a sense of failure not just in the action, but often in their identity. It becomes easy for someone to internalize the rejection. Instead of seeing it as "this person didn't reciprocate my feelings," they might interpret it as "I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy of love, something is wrong with me." This is where the danger lies. Especially among teenagers and young adults whose identities and self-esteem are still in development, rejection can lead to serious emotional consequences. Feelings of shame, embarrassment, or humiliation may arise. A single painful event like this can trigger a negative spiral of thoughts that lead to anxiety, depression, or social withdrawal. It's important to realize that while a romantic rejection might seem minor from the outside, for the person involved, it may feel like an emotional catastrophe. When educators, parents, or peers respond to someone's pain with "just get over it," or "it's not a big deal," they may unintentionally invalidate the deep hurt that the person is experiencing. This lack of empathy can compound the pain, leading to feelings of isolation. It's not that people should never say no or decline romantic advances, of course. Everyone has the right to say no, but we must be more mindful of how we do it. Understanding the emotional magnitude of rejection doesn't mean avoiding it. It means handling it responsibly and humanely. Rejection also interacts with a concept in psychology known as attachment theory. People with insecure attachment styles, often developed in childhood, may respond to rejection in more intense and painful ways. For them, a romantic rejection may echo deeper fears of abandonment or not being good enough. Even those with secure attachments are not immune to the pain of being turned down, especially when the rejection is done abruptly or without explanation. Furthermore, in the age of digital communication, rejection can be even more confusing. Ghosting, the act of disappearing without explanation, has become increasingly common, and it often leaves the rejected person with no closure. That lack of clarity adds a layer of emotional disorientation. Not only are they rejected, but they also don't understand why or what changed. This ambiguity can be more painful than a direct no, because it leaves room for the mind to fill in the blanks with worst-case scenarios and self-blame. Rejection becomes especially dangerous when it's paired with silence or cruelty. Some people believe that ignoring someone after rejecting them is the best way to create distance or avoid awkwardness. In reality, this silence can be psychologically damaging. It tells the rejected person that their feelings didn't even deserve acknowledgement. It suggests that their act of vulnerability wasn't met with basic respect. And for some, especially those already dealing with emotional struggles, this can feel devastating. Kindness, empathy, and clear communication are not about sparing feelings in an insincere way. They are about recognizing the emotional reality of others and responding in a way that respects their humanity. Rejecting someone with compassion doesn't mean you agree with them or give them false hope. It simply means you see them as a person who is worthy of care, even when you cannot give them what they want. To conclude, rejection is far more than just an answer to a question. It is a moment of human connection or disconnection that can shape how someone sees themselves. When rejection is handled with insensitivity or silence, the hurt lingers and sometimes grows. But when it's delivered with thoughtfulness and emotional intelligence, it becomes less of a wound and more of a stepping stone toward growth and resilience. If we are to foster a kinder, healthier society, we must teach the importance of not just what we say in these moments, but how we say it. When someone opens up emotionally, especially in the form of a romantic confession or personal expression of affection, it is not just a moment of sharing, it is a moment of vulnerability. That individual is not only presenting their feelings, but they are also offering a part of their identity, their self, worth, and their emotional truth. If that gesture is met with silence, the consequences can be far more painful than we often realize. Silence, in this context, is not simply the absence of words, it becomes a powerful and often painful message. And tragically, that message is very often misinterpreted as cruelty. Many people assume that silence is a neutral response. They believe that by saying nothing, they are avoiding further discomfort or confrontation. They may feel that ignoring someone who confessed their feelings is an indirect but safe way to move on, but for the person on the receiving end, this lack of response can be emotionally damaging. To them, silence is not quiet, it's loud. It screams rejection in the harshest way possible. It removes dignity from the exchange and leaves the person who was vulnerable without any clarity, closure, or affirmation of their humanity. When someone is rejected through silence, their mind is often left to wander into dangerous territory. Thoughts begin to spiral. They ask themselves, did I say something wrong? Was I so unworthy that I didn't even deserve a response? Did they laugh at me afterward? These thoughts can quickly evolve into self-doubt, shame, or even self-loathing. Without a clear and kind rejection, the person has no framework to understand what happened, only the overwhelming feeling that they have been dismissed not just in terms of their feelings, but in terms of their value as a person. This interpretation can be particularly intense in emotionally sensitive individuals, such as teenagers or those already struggling with issues of self-esteem, identity, or belonging. For them, silence feels like confirmation of their worst fears, that they are invisible, unimportant, or not good enough. Even if this was never the intention of the silent party, the emotional impact is real and lasting. The human brain is wired to seek patterns, to find meaning, and when it is met with nothing, it often creates painful stories in the vacuum. In educational and psychological settings, we often emphasize the importance of communication as a core life skill. But in personal interactions, especially in emotionally charged ones, communication becomes more than just skill, it becomes moral responsibility. Choosing to remain silent after someone has expressed something emotionally significant is not a neutral action. It communicates avoidance, disinterest, or worse, disregard, and in some cases, it can even feel like punishment. Let us consider the mindset of the person who chooses silence. Often, they are not being deliberately unkind. They may feel awkward, unsure of what to say, or afraid of hurting someone further. But what is critical to understand is that silence in this instance is rarely protective, it is often harmful. It is a coping mechanism for the person rejecting, but it becomes emotional trauma for the person being rejected. Good intentions do not erase bad impact. Sometimes people think that avoiding a conversation is more gentle than delivering a direct no. They believe that if they don't say anything, the person will eventually get the message. But this method lacks clarity, and the absence of clarity breeds confusion and emotional instability. Rather than making someone feel gently let down, it leaves them suspended in a place of emotional uncertainty. They don't move on, they spiral. They don't heal, they question themselves endlessly. Furthermore, silence after rejection can lead to what psychologists call ambiguous loss, a feeling of mourning something that is not clearly defined. The person may not even be certain what they are grieving: the rejection itself, the absence of a conversation, or the loss of a relationship that never began. This type of emotional fog is incredibly difficult to process, and it takes a toll on mental health. Ambiguous loss can lead to prolonged anxiety, sadness, and in some cases, social withdrawal or difficulty trusting others in the future. In digital spaces, the phenomenon of ghosting has only magnified this problem. Ghosting is when someone cuts off all communication without explanation. Though it has become normalized in some circles, it is fundamentally a silent rejection that offers no closure. It reinforces the same emotional harm, confusion, worthlessness, and a sense of being discarded. What's especially problematic is that ghosting removes the possibility of respectful dialogue. It treats people like interruptions rather than individuals with emotions, and it undermines the foundations of healthy interpersonal relationships. It's important to remember that kindness doesn't require deep emotional investment. It only requires recognition of the other person's humanity. Saying something, even a brief, clear, and compassionate message, can make all the difference. A statement like, "I appreciate your honesty, but I don't feel the same way. I hope you understand," acknowledges the effort, respects the person. In today's world, we are encouraged to be strong, independent, and self-sufficient. These are valuable traits. However, in our focus on personal resilience, we often overlook a fundamental truth. Emotional well-being, though centered in the individual, is influenced and shaped by the environment around us, by the words, actions, and attitudes of others. Emotional well-being is not something we can isolate into private responsibility alone. It is, in many ways, a shared responsibility. This concept does not mean that we are responsible for how everyone else feels at all times. Each person does have personal accountability for managing their emotions, seeking support, and working through their challenges. However, our actions and inactions directly impact the emotional climate we live in. Whether we offer kindness, indifference, compassion, or silence, it matters. Every social interaction has an emotional consequence, and in the context of rejection, especially one involving emotional vulnerability, how we respond becomes a defining moment in someone else's emotional experience. When someone puts themselves in a position to be emotionally rejected, such as confessing romantic feelings or expressing affection, they are engaging in what psychologists might call an emotionally high-risk act. It is not merely an interaction, it is a moment of potential transformation. The person expressing those feelings is often anxious, uncertain, and hopeful. Their emotional well-being is delicately positioned in that moment. How the other person responds can either soften the experience or intensify the hurt. This is where shared responsibility becomes vital. The person on the receiving end of such a confession is not to blame for the other person's feelings or emotional state. However, they are responsible for how they communicate their response. Choosing kindness, clarity, and empathy can make a significant difference. A compassionate rejection, even if it is firm, allows the person being rejected to leave the situation with dignity. On the other hand, a cruel or indifferent response, or worse, complete silence, may leave the individual emotionally harmed and doubting their self-worth. Consider how emotional injuries work similarly to physical ones. If someone trips and falls, we don't say, "That's your problem, get up." We instinctively reach out, offer a hand, or at least ask, "Are you okay?" The same should be true for emotional setbacks. When someone is emotionally bruised, especially because they took the risk of being open with us, we ought to respond with care. That response helps them heal. It does not require becoming their therapist or accepting their feelings. It simply means being human and treating them with kindness. In many schools, families, and communities, we teach children and young adults how to succeed, how to work hard, how to stand up for themselves. But we often fail to teach emotional responsibility, the understanding that our words and behaviors affect others profoundly. People are often taught to guard themselves, but not taught how to care for others in emotionally delicate moments. This gap in education creates a society where people know how to say no, but not how to say it with grace and empathy. Shared emotional responsibility also creates safer emotional environments. When people know they will be treated with kindness even if they are rejected, they are more likely to express themselves honestly. This leads to better communication, stronger relationships, and less emotional confusion. Conversely, if people fear that being emotionally open will lead to ridicule, silence, or rejection without explanation, they may begin to close themselves off. This emotional suppression can lead to increased mental health issues, such as anxiety, depression, or isolation. Furthermore, by practicing shared emotional responsibility, we model behavior that others will carry forward. A kind rejection does not only serve the person being rejected, it teaches others how to act in similar situations. It builds a culture of empathy. It creates a norm where people feel valued, even in moments of disappointment, and this, over time, leads to communities that are emotionally healthier, more resilient, and more connected. Another important aspect is that emotional responsibility enhances our own emotional intelligence. When we take the time to think about how our actions will affect others, we develop empathy, patience, and communication skills. These traits are not just good for others, they enrich our own lives as well. Emotionally intelligent people tend to have more satisfying relationships, better teamwork, and greater self-awareness. So, in being emotionally responsible for others, we also grow within ourselves. Importantly, shared emotional responsibility also means creating space for honest conversations after rejection. Sometimes, the person being rejected may have questions. They may feel confused or seek understanding. It takes maturity and empathy to respond to these conversations without defensiveness or avoidance. A short explanation delivered kindly can bring peace to someone who might otherwise carry emotional uncertainty for a long time. It is also essential to recognize that emotional responsibility doesn't end with the initial rejection. Checking in, offering kind gestures, or simply not avoiding someone out of guilt shows emotional integrity. We don't need to become overly involved in others' emotions, but we should remain accessible and respectful. Even small acts like making eye contact, returning a greeting, or acknowledging the person's presence can communicate that they are still respected and valued despite the romantic rejection. To conclude, emotional well-being is deeply personal, but never purely individual. Each of us carries the power to support or strain the emotional lives of others through how we speak, respond, and behave. When we embrace emotional responsibility as a shared social value, we reduce harm, strengthen trust, and promote compassion. And in doing so, we don't just protect someone else's heart, we elevate our collective humanity. Kindness is often described as a personality trait, something we either possess or don't. We hear people say things like, "She's such a kind person," or "He's naturally compassionate," as though kindness is embedded into someone's DNA. While there may be some truth to the idea that temperament plays a role in how we express care, it's important to challenge this oversimplification. Kindness is not simply a matter of personal nature, it is a skill. Like listening, speaking, or critical thinking, kindness can be developed, refined, and strengthened over time. In the context of emotional relationships, and especially during moments of rejection, kindness becomes not only a moral virtue, but a vital social competency. Understanding kindness as a skill has profound implications, particularly in educational and interpersonal development. It means that we can and must teach it. We must model it, practice it, and expect it as part of the way we interact with others. It also means that failing to act kindly in a given situation is not always a sign of cruelty or malice. Often, it's a sign that someone hasn't learned how to manage emotionally uncomfortable interactions with grace. One of the most emotionally uncomfortable situations we face as humans is rejecting someone, especially someone who has opened up to us emotionally. In these moments, kindness is not about sugarcoating the truth or avoiding honesty. It's about communicating our truth in a way that still respects the dignity of the other person. Why is kindness difficult during rejection? Because many people confuse kindness with emotional obligation. They fear that if they are too gentle or too caring, they might give false hope. Others feel that distancing themselves through silence or avoidance is the most effective way to set boundaries. But this is a misunderstanding of what kindness actually is. Kindness is not a lack of boundaries. Kindness is the manner in which we uphold our boundaries. It is possible to say no firmly and clearly while still expressing empathy and respect. In fact, kindness during rejection is most powerful when it is combined with emotional clarity. When we view kindness as a skill, we can begin to break it down into components that can be learned and practiced. For example, kindness in communication involves active listening, choosing thoughtful words, managing tone, and being aware of the other person's emotional state. It means saying things like, "I appreciate that you shared this with me," or "I admire your honesty," even if you don't reciprocate the feelings. These small acknowledgments go a long way in helping the other person feel respected rather than dismissed. In the context of rejection, kind communication avoids ridicule, silence, or vague excuses. It involves directness paired with compassion. It's not about softening the blow in a deceptive way, but rather delivering the truth in a humane, emotionally sensitive manner. For instance, saying, "I don't feel the same way, but I respect you and I hope you're okay," is an example of how kindness can live inside honesty. In schools, workplaces, and communities, we tend to reward technical skills and measurable accomplishments. We praise intelligence, ambition, and performance, but we don't always reward kindness, especially in complex emotional situations. In fact, some may see kindness as weakness or emotional indulgence. But that mindset is outdated and deeply harmful. Kindness is strength. It takes emotional intelligence, maturity, and courage to be kind in moments of discomfort. Especially when rejecting someone, kindness means standing in an emotionally charged moment, acknowledging another person's vulnerability, and choosing to honor their dignity rather than escape into silence or harshness. Teaching kindness as a social skill must start early. Young people need to learn not only what kindness is, but how to express it in challenging moments. They should be given tools and language for difficult conversations. This can include role-playing scenarios, writing exercises, or open discussions about empathy and human connection. Emotional education is just as important as academic education. If we want to raise emotionally intelligent individuals, we need to teach them that how we treat others, especially in difficult situations, defines the quality of our character. Kindness also strengthens social bonds. When people consistently experience kindness even during rejection, they are more likely to feel emotionally safe in future relationships. This reduces social anxiety and encourages honest, open communication. It also builds a culture of mutual respect. On the other hand, when kindness is absent in emotionally charged interactions, people begin to distrust others, suppress their emotions, or isolate themselves. Another aspect of kindness as a skill is self-regulation. In moments of discomfort, such as rejecting someone, our own emotions, awkwardness, guilt, fear of confrontation can get in the way. Practicing kindness means learning how to manage these internal reactions so that they do not turn into defensive behaviors. Emotional self-regulation allows us to pause, think, and choose kindness over impulse. This, too, is a skill that improves with practice and reflection. Furthermore, kindness is contagious. Just like any learned behavior, it can spread. When someone experiences a kind rejection, they are more likely to extend that same courtesy to someone else in the future. This creates a ripple effect that positively influences entire communities. A single kind response can echo through many lives, teaching others how to approach vulnerability, disappointment, and emotional honesty with grace. In summary, kindness is not something that only a few people are born with. It is a learned, practiced, and cultivated skill that belongs at the center of our emotional lives. Especially in the moments when we reject others, kindness matters most. Because it's in those moments when someone is vulnerable and exposed that our words and actions can either heal or harm. Let us commit to teaching, modeling, and choosing kindness, not just when it's easy, but precisely when it is most difficult. That is when it counts the most.